Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar from the League of American Orchestras entitled The Landscape of American Orchestras, a Guide for New Board Members. My name is David Stiers. I'm the Director of Learning and Leadership Programs at the League and the Constituent Liaison for Orchestra Board Members at the League. And over the past 20 years, I have served on the staff as a senior governance consultant for both BoardSource in Washington, D.C., and the Center for Volunteer and Nonprofit Leadership in California. If you have any governance questions at any time, or if the League can be of any service, don't hesitate to contact me at my email address and my phone number on the screen. I want to also again welcome you to today's free member webinar being presented as part of the League's Notebook Governance Center, with additional support provided by generous grants from the Howard Gilman Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as in part by public funds from the New York State Council on the Arts, with support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature. For some housekeeping, a few quick technical notes about the Zoom webinar. Again, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, and if you have questions for our presenters, please ask them in the Q&A box on your screen, and we'll be addressing questions before the end of the session. And you can also find the closed captioning live transcript option through the icon in the Zoom toolbar. Also, everyone who registered for today's webinar will receive an email with the recording, the PowerPoint slides, and the transcripts of this webinar by the end of the week. And we also have put together various resources on our website, which we have a QR code that you can click on, and those resources will also be listed in the email follow-up. We also want you to make sure that you access the benefits of being a member of the League. So through your orchestra's membership, the League provides not only the staff and volunteers, but all board members and access to a wealth of governance resources and orchestra field research at our website, americanorchestras.org. Now, some of our resources are member-only login, and you can do that through your own personal account. If you have any questions, just contact us at member@americanorchestras.org, and we can help you get that set up if you need so. Also, we encourage you, if you don't already receive our latest articles and news emails, please sign up for Symphony at symphony.org. And when you go to symphony.org, you'll see a screen with an easy button to quickly sign up. And we do not spam you. We'll send you about 2 or 3 emails a week, but it will help you keep abreast of all that's happening in the orchestra field on a weekly basis of different major concerts, news happenings concerning orchestras, as well as changes within the field of people moving to different places. Also, we've prepared a benefit sheet that's on our website that you can download, and feel free to share with all your board members or anyone who wants to make sure that they understand how to access all these benefits of being a League member, orchestra, and then our orchestra board member benefits. And again, don't hesitate to ask for help at any time. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our presenters today. Our immediate past chair of our board, Doug Hagerman, who's also a past chair of the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra, as well as our president and CEO, Simon Woods, who's been with the League for just over 4 years now. He started in fall of 2020 after about 25 years of a very distinguished career with various orchestras across the country and the globe. And so, again, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Doug and Simon to continue with our presentation today.
Thanks, David, and welcome, everyone. Thanks for your participation today, and thank you for thinking orchestras are important enough to volunteer your time to support them. Today's program has 3 premises. One is that to serve effectively as a board member of an orchestra, you need to follow trends in the field. Keep yourself informed about what's going on. Number 2, there are national resources that will help with local discussions. We have case studies, best practices, guides, peer group interactions, and so forth that whatever issue you're facing locally, we can probably find other orchestras that have dealt with the same thing. And then the third premise of this is that you will be filled with strength, determination, and just enthusiasm by knowing that you are not alone in your work. And whatever seemingly intractable problem you are addressing in your orchestra, whatever budget deficit you face, whatever challenge you're looking at, you're not alone. Other people are dealing with the same thing, and there are things that people are working on to get out of those situations and make and really optimize the effectiveness and the mission of their orchestra. So that with those premises stated, let's dive into what's actually going on. So Simon, take it away.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Doug. Thanks, David. It's great to see everybody. This is a little bit of an experiment. We've known for a while that there was a need for this to help new board members get oriented to the field and to the services of the league. And but we've not been able to put it together until now. So this is somewhat of an experiment. It's the first time we've done it. We've got a tremendous amount of content. You'll be getting an evaluation at the end of this. And we will really appreciate your thoughts about how we've done, how helpful it was, how useful it was, so that we can calibrate this for next time. We are planning to make this a regular annual event, probably in the fall every year. As we know, board members tend to start at the beginning of the seasons. And we hope it's going to be useful to you all. And I'll just reiterate what David said and what Doug said about not being alone. The league is an amazing community, and we are here for you. And so you should never hesitate to be in touch with David or with me or with Doug, and we'll be happy to help guide you through whatever issues you may be dealing with. Okay. So let's start off then. Introduction to the orchestra field. This will give a little bit, we'll just have a little bit of an overview about what the orchestra field is. We have a document that we've linked in our resources guide, which is called Orchestras at a Glance, which we update every year. And this is a really critical document that we use particularly in our advocacy in Washington, D.C., and we give to orchestras to help with their advocacy in their local communities. And one of the big takeaways from these slides is the sheer size of the orchestra community. There are, we say here approximately 2,200 professional community and youth orchestras in the US. It is a huge field. We are in every state, and we are in every community from rural to suburban to urban. With a huge range of budgets. And it's often context for board members who may be board members of major American orchestras in urban centers. They may not realize just how broad the field is. Often I say to people sometimes that that the general public has really heard of two or three orchestras only, the New York Philharmonic and the Chicago Symphony and their own orchestra. I mean, just to say a few examples. I mean, it's the scale of the field is important to understand. And orchestras are a vital part of the landscape. These are all extracts from this document that you can look at your leisure. Orchestras are successful. They're vibrant. They're an incredibly important part of America's musical landscape. They've been around for a long time. And orchestras are resilient, and despite all the challenges of recent years, they continue to be successful and to thrive. And why do they thrive? Well, partly because they contribute to communities. They contribute to the creative workforce and to the financial health of communities. They are a critical source of creation of jobs. They support business. They support local expenditures. They support tourism, hotels, restaurants, parking. They are a vital part of economies, as well as being a vital part of communities. And I think it's always very important to stress both of those things. Orchestras are both they're part of the fabric of our communities, but they are when you're talking to people in your communities, it's important to keep in mind this kind of balance of the economic impact and also the sort of civic, educational, creative vitality and health of communities. And if you think about how they draw people together, how orchestras bring together musicians, volunteers, philanthropists, young people, it's pretty extraordinary how many people are involved across the field. The next one is important here. Orchestras deliver on their non-profit mission thanks to charitable contributions from a broad base of donors. This is really important, and we'll come back to a point about this a bit later in the slides, because one of the things where we always stress is that orchestras are not elite. They're not elitist. We're always trying to counter this impression of orchestras as elitist organizations, and this is one example of it. 72% of charitable gifts to orchestras are under $250. So this is a very useful talking point about the breadth of support that orchestras enjoy. So when we think about the orchestra field, the diversity of orchestras is enormous. Everything from the orchestra that employs its musicians 52 weeks a year, to orchestras who hire its musicians on a per service basis, to orchestras that are entirely volunteer. The smallest ones in our group, entirely volunteer. There's many lines of business, from pure classical to pops to special concerts, which have been particularly important in recent years in the kind of financial ecology of orchestras, and of course, education and community concerts. There's an enormous breadth of how orchestras actually rent their venues. We have orchestras who own their venues, orchestras who manage them for a city or for a community. We have orchestras who lease them, and then we have orchestras who rent per concert. Most orchestras, musicians are members of the American Federation of Musicians, but by far from all. When you get down into the smaller orchestras, that tends not to be true. And there's an enormous breadth of different staff sizes. Sometimes, we have to be very alert to this, because in all the work that we provide for orchestras, or the resources we provide, sometimes we can fall in, especially those of us like me who've worked in large orchestras my entire career. It's very easy for us to sometimes slip into saying things like, you should speak to your marketing department about this. And I'm often pulled up on when I say something like that from the one person who is the only staff member who says, I am the marketing department and the development department and the HR department. So we just have to remember that enormous breadth, from the very, very largest organizations to the tiniest. And the same with the budgets. Everything from the Los Angeles Philharmonic with 150 million or so budget, right down to our tiny community orchestras. And as I said before, urban and suburban, rural, all 50 states. And the last one is also, I think, interesting because music directors, there's also a big breadth there. You've got your music directors who fly in a handful of times a year to conduct extremely prestigious concerts on one hand. And then on the other hand, then you've got music directors who are full-time employees. And then you've got music directors who are really community members. So again, I don't think we need to belabor the point here. The orchestra field has a vast diversity. You may see in front of you one kind of organization, but there's a vast diversity of kinds of organizations. And by the way, one of the great things about engaging through the league, especially if you come to conference, which I really just cannot emphasize enough, we have a great board members track at conference. You will meet people from very different orchestras to yours, and that's part of the joy of being involved with community of the league. So the kind of subset of orchestras is who's actually in the league, who are league members. Well, we have about just under 500 adult orchestras, about 100 youth orchestras, some international orchestras, collegiate orchestras, and then we have an important group of individuals, people who have individual members, which you don't need to have, but you can have, and gives you different benefits. Then we have our very important business partners who are more often than not in the commercial side of the business, providing services to orchestras and help us with our with sponsorships and commercial partnerships, and are a very, very important part of the orchestra ecology and some other institutions. And this is how we divide up orchestras. So we divide our orchestras into groups. And this happens for the executive director meeting groups. It happens for the budget reporting, which I'll come to in a minute. And you can see here, it's everything. This is how we divide it from, the top, really the top 50 orchestras, which is group 1 and 2. And then the middle-sized orchestras and the smaller ones. And if you look at how this breaks down, you can see here, it's quite informative slide, this. So group 1 and group 2, as I said, is about the top 50. And then you've got the sort of medium-sized orchestras between groups 3, 4, and 5. And then look how big the community of smaller orchestras is. So just absolutely important also to realize that's part of the breadth. So that's really it. Very quick overview of the field. Lots more we can say about that, but I think it gives you a sense of how you fit in, how your orchestra fits into the whole picture. And so now back to you, Doug, to talk about governance for the next 15 minutes or so.
Great. So, this is a topic that could be much longer, and I'm going to be quick. And I urge you to take a look at the slides afterwards to absorb all of this. So being on an orchestra board has some differences from other boards, and quickly, the most important one of those is that most orchestras have 3 leaders: a staff leader or CEO or executive director, a music director or chief conductor, and a board chair. And typically the CEO will report to the board chair. Sometimes the music director reports to the board chair. Sometimes the music director reports to the CEO. There's lots of pros and cons to those different models, but pay attention to how it's set up in your orchestra. We have orchestra musicians involved in governance in most of our orchestras, sitting on committees and so forth, sitting on the board. We have some unique committees that you might not find in addition to the typical stuff like a finance committee, a development committee, a governance committee. We might have some that are specific to the fact that we are music organizations. I think a lot of board members are unclear on what is their role as it relates to artistic matters. If I'm on the board, do I get to tell the orchestra whether to play Tchaikovsky versus Brahms? Spoiler alert, the answer to that is usually no. But, and then we have difficult business models. I saw someone asking about structural deficits. They exist through many orchestras in our field, and controlling costs and building revenue is a perpetual issue for us. And so we become dependent upon heroic philanthropy. And sometimes our orchestras are undercapitalized, have weak balance sheets, which plays a role as well. We're going to talk a little bit later about equity, diversity, and inclusion. It's an imperative for our field, critical to our sustainability as organizations. And so a lot of orchestras are working on it. We have not the world's greatest reputation in Washington and around the country. Orchestras are perceived as elitist, and that's a problem. People don't feel comfortable coming to orchestra concerts if they feel that they don't belong there. And so I'm going to move on to the next slide, but there's some key differences between other nonprofits and orchestras. So as you think about governance, think about who the constituencies are of an orchestra. And I've listed them here in the bullets, and perhaps this is obvious, but we need to make sure that we attend to all of these constituencies. They all have a strong interest in where the organization's headed, how it's run, its culture, and so forth. So we don't just exist just for the donors. We don't exist just for the musicians. We don't exist just for the board. We exist for all of these communities, and they all play an important part. And the board needs to be attentive to all of them. Someone told me once that the 2 most enduring constituencies of a nonprofit orchestra are the musicians and the audience. And there is some truth to that. Where the music gets made is in the concert hall with the musicians and the audience, and that's where the most important constituency work happens. Pay attention to your bylaws. The bylaws set the rules for how your organization is governed. If you haven't read your organization's bylaws, I recommend that you do so. Next slide. We have, I touched on this briefly, but we have this leadership model where three individuals typically share leadership. One of them, the CEO, is usually a full-time employee. One of them, the board chair, is usually a volunteer. And a third one, the music director, could be anything from a part-time employee to an independent contractor, could be involved 50 weeks a year, or could be involved 8 weeks a year, depending on how their deal with the orchestra is structured. It's important that all these people have a job description. You would be surprised how many places where the job description of the music director is a mystery. Is it the role of the music director just to conduct great concerts? Or is it the role of the music director to make sure the orchestra thrives in the community? Is it the role of the music director to fulfill all aspects of the mission, or just the performance side? These are important questions that orchestras need to address and have the conversation and document them in job descriptions. Now, we have processes in our business for selecting music directors and CEOs. And sometimes we also have processes for selecting board chairs. And almost always this is done by some sort of selection committee, and almost always involves musicians in addition to board members and staff members. So if you're in a situation where you have a leadership hire to make, you have to pay attention to what those processes are. Your collective bargaining agreement will say how many slots your musicians get on the selection committee and so forth. And I know not all of you have collective bargaining agreements, but probably most of you do. In any event, all these three leaders have to figure out a way to get along and work together. The stories of administrative leaders and artistic leaders of orchestras and other arts organizations, clawing at each other's like wild animals are legion. And we need to make sure that doesn't happen in our organization. They need to be collaborative. We need to be thought partners with each other. And so everyone can play a role that supports the organization's mission, even though everyone has a slightly different job to do in supporting that. And then I guess the last point I want to make about the leadership model is that the board needs to represent the community, and it needs to take an external vantage point. How well is this organization serving this community? How well are we reaching everyone? We're taking a large chunk of the arts dollars in our community, and oftentimes we're the largest arts organization in our city. Are we living up to the implications of that by making sure that we serve everyone? So take a perspective that you're representing the community as you do your work as an orchestra board. Okay, next slide. Building on that last thought, the board is supposed to represent the public in maintaining the mission, vision, values of the organization, as well as its integrity. And so there's a fiduciary component to this, as well as an aspirational component. And our purpose really is to help the organization take community investment and translate it into public value. And at the bottom of this slide, I've set out some differences between how boards are supposed to look at the organization and staff is supposed to look at the organization. And it's important that we realize the board's about oversight, not about management. The board is not a board that gets involved in telling staff members what to do. Almost always causes more harm than good. And while the board is providing input to the strategy and approving the strategies, it's not executing the strategy. So the board collaborates with the staff and asks the right questions. The staff collaborates with the board and keeps the board informed. So recognize that there are limits on pushing your own ideas onto the staff. If you are a orchestra leader, you have people all day telling you what to do. You know what the XYZ symphony should do? And then the person goes and says, you should have this kind of concert, or you should play in this venue, or you should have this partnership. And people who don't really know are always telling orchestras what to do. So as board members, you have to be careful not to contribute to that soul-crushing dynamic with your staff leaders by piling on and doing your own version of here's what you should do. In short, stay in your lane. Next slide, please. So I have two slides here, and one is the board's collective responsibilities, and the other is the board's individual responsibilities. And I don't really have time to talk about each of these, but the board as a whole needs to do all this. It needs to make sure you've got the right CEO and the right music director. It needs to set the strategy. It needs to ensure that the organization is able to function by having adequate financial resources, having its assets protected with good financial oversight, that the board will go forward and will be a strong board that can support the organization and the community, and that will make sure that the board has a sound reputation in the community. And as a board, you have to figure out how to do this. And so the work of the board over a cycle of a year or two between the board meetings and the committee meetings, you need to really tackle all this. And not all of it will happen at the full board. Some of it will happen at committees, but this is the collective responsibilities of the board. Turning to the individual responsibilities of board members, on the next slide, Simon, each of you, I would contend, has an obligation to be each of these 10 things for your orchestra. You know, you're here today learning about trends affecting orchestras. Hopefully you understand your mission. You're helping with fundraising. I would assert that that's part of the job. Some people don't want to ask for money, but every single person can introduce people to the orchestra, can take people to concerts, can talk up the orchestra from people who might be potential donors. So get your head around the fact that you have a role in fundraising. It's not something that is just for the staff. It is part of the board's role. Hopefully you provide your financial support. Hopefully you're prepared for meetings and you understand the financials and the budgets and so forth. You need to respect the abilities of the CEO and the music director, but be prepared to assist them and be prepared to provide high-level guidance. And so if we do all of these 10 things for our orchestra and we get our head around that, that's part of our job, we will propel the orchestra forward with momentum. Okay, I want to briefly touch on this subject of equity, diversity, and inclusion, which is very much in the news these days. This could be a whole seminar, but I'm gonna make only 4 points. One is that most orchestras are working on this, and I think most orchestras don't plan to stop working on this in light of the stuff that's going on. Number 2, there are good business and artistic reasons for this. They're listed on the slide. Doesn't have anything really to do with being woke. It has to do with orchestra being as sustainable as possible in its community and serving the largest part of the community so that it can grow and thrive. Number 3, most orchestra equity, diversity, and inclusion programs are about creating access and opportunity for those who have been excluded in the past. They are not about lowering standards. Most orchestras have blind auditions, and no EDI program is going to take that away. And then the 4th point is that there is, and most people don't know this, but there is a painful history of overt discrimination in orchestras. We ran off talented performers, composers, and audience members for decades. And we need to bring these people back in the field because we need their artistry, we need their support, we need their engagement. So that's just a little bit about equity, diversity, and inclusion. Moving on to my last slide, boards operate in 3 modes. They operate in fiduciary mode, strategic mode, and generative mode. And, the fiduciary mode is about, the financials and the ethics policies and the checks and balances and all that stuff that has to do with making sure the organization is run properly. Secondly, the board plays a strategic role when it plans for the future, when it sets new goals and prioritizes things and aligns resources to those future goals. And third, boards act in a generative way, where they're thinking through tough problems, asking tough questions, identifying what we'd like the future to look like, and really prioritize what's the most important. And if your board is spending all of its time checking compliance boxes and listening to committee reports or staff reports, you might not be making adequate time for the really critical strategic and generative work that your board needs to get to. So I urge you all to think about how you can support the strategic and generative work of your board, where people can air their opinions and have input into what the future is going to look like for this orchestra. So I am going to stop there. I want to ask David to put in the chat a link to the Notaboom Governance Center on the League website. And I also want to make you all aware of this book. Oh my, it's called Effective Orchestra Governance. It's a League publication. You can get it in PDF form or in paper form. It is our pamphlet, long pamphlet, short book size guide to orchestra governance. I hope you'll all get a copy and read it. So with that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Simon.
Thanks, Doug. And I'll also mention about governance in the resources that we put as an attachment for this webinar. There's also an article that I wrote for Symphony Magazine, which is a kind of provocative take on what governance of the future might look like for orchestras. And you might want to have a look at that, see if you agree with it. You may not, but it puts some rather slightly different ideas out for discussion. And governance, I'm sure Doug would agree, governance is not a fixed role. It evolves and changes according to the climate and according to each organization's needs, and it's a very fascinating area. And I'll also say thank you to Doug. One of our most important programs is Essentials of Orchestra Management, which is our main training program for leaders in the field. And Doug just did in 15 minutes what he spends 2 hours doing in Essentials. So that was literally a very quick walk through governance. Okay. Let's go on to issues and trends in the field. Now we're going from kind of the sort of abstract, theoretical, fixed stuff into a very live view on what's actually going on right now. And again, this is an area we could spend all afternoon on this topic. So I've tried to pick out a few things that are important, and I'm going to talk about what's going on in fundraising and in sales and in overall financial picture. But let's start with this. As we think about our work at the League, there are certain themes that come back time and time again. We have a strategic plan, which is we use as a guide, and these themes flow right through our strategic plan. Growing the audience base, broadening the demographics of audience, relevance, and building deeper communities in the community. It's first on the list for a good reason. There's actually probably nothing that we are doing right now in our field that is more important than this, as we work to make the field sustainable for the long term. And of course, it's related to what we put on stage, programming, creativity, and new forms of presentation. There's an incredible amount of creativity going on around the field right now, and we're always happy to showcase that, and it's part of what makes the field vibrant. Financial and organizational sustainability hardly need mention. I think everybody is aware of that. Youth development and participation. Orchestras have always had a deep relationship with young people in their communities. It's more and more important, especially as we get more and more worried about educational standards and how those, as it relates to music, and how that feeds through into what future audiences look like. As Doug mentioned, equity, diversity, inclusion is critical, and the way we articulate it in our strategic plan is actually accelerating the pace of change. And there's some good news and there's some less good news here. And I'm going to come to some data on that in a minute. But we really do believe that the pace is not going fast enough right now for orchestras to think that to be comfortable that they will be sustainable in a much more diverse country, the way the demographics of this country are going. Internal alignment is a really important issue because, of course, any of these topics, there are different perspectives. And if you look in our organizations, one of the things that makes our organizations very complicated is that we function in what we call this multi-stakeholder environment. You know, we've got board members, musicians, staff, artistic directors, music directors, and not everybody has the same vision of success. And you know, our executive directors, particularly all your executive directors, I will tell you, almost 100% of them wrestle with, on a regular basis, this notion of internal alignment. How do they pull all the different constituencies of the organization together to face in the same direction? It's definitely a vital point. And then I put this last point on here, tension between the past and future, tradition and adaptation. We're seeing that play out in real time in political life, in society, and it makes the art of change leadership more and more complicated. So these are the things that I think everybody in our field is thinking about right now. Okay, let's talk a little bit. Now we're going to get really specific. Let's talk about audiences. So the good news is they are slowly getting younger. We have a thing called the TRG benchmark. David can maybe throw that into the chat, which is a partnership with our data partners, TRG, to kind of give us real-time insights on what's going on in the field. And the TRG benchmark reveals that audiences are slowly getting younger. We're seeing more millennial and Gen X purchases, and that's encouraging. We're also seeing tickets revenue rise significantly above pre-pandemic levels for the first time in the last 12 months. We're now not only back, but we're above where we were before. Now, of course, in the meantime, we've had some pretty big inflation numbers, and so we haven't necessarily recovered on inflation, but the general trend is encouraging in single tickets and, really interestingly, in subscriptions. And we're still pressing on this because it's a relatively new data point. But you know, there's a general societal trend towards membership. People love membership, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Netflix, you know, whether it's your, you know, United Airlines or whatever airline you travel with. People love their memberships, and it's no coincidence that that's flowing into a bit more than a trend now around subscription and memberships in orchestras. And it's good news because we've watched subscriptions decline for a long time. I'm going to be a little cautious about this data point because it's relatively early, and we still need to really validate it. But it's certainly an intriguing sign. And the last point is anecdotal. We don't have data for it, but embedded in this increase in numbers, there is a sense that that some of the growth may not be in classical, that orchestras may be seeing static or even slightly declining classical numbers while they're doing really well on movie soundtracks, on your Harry Potters and things like that. And they might be doing really well on pops and on other programs. But there's a little bit of a concern about core classical audiences. It could have to do with education, these education issues I spoke to before. So that's just something that we're going to very much keep an eye on in the years to come. So that's a very quick analysis on audiences. Fundraising is not quite such good news. The indicators on fundraising are a little bit problematic. Donations are down, not only from the peak in the pandemic, which is not surprising because we know that there was huge generosity happened during the pandemic, but they're a little bit down on 2019, which is concerning. And although we are seeing, just as we're seeing Gen X and millennial more ticket buyers, we're seeing more Gen X and millennial patrons increasing their giving. But it's not enough to offset what I think is the biggest issue going on in philanthropy right now, which is this issue about the generational transfer of wealth. And one of the things I would say about this is, I spend a lot of time on the road visiting orchestras of all sizes across the country. And, we always emphasize every orchestra has its own story. You may hear all these trends from me. You may think, nah, it's not my orchestra. My orchestra's slightly different. Absolutely. Every orchestra has its own story. This story is almost everywhere. The generational transfer of wealth, it's trillions of dollars which are getting transferred over the next 10 to 20 years. And what's happening here is that wealth is being transferred from very, very long-standing donors to younger family members who may not, in fact, probably don't have the same degree of interest in what we do to their parents. And when you add that on top of the aging out of long-standing donors who are stopping giving altogether, it is a very significant concern. There are opportunities there. There are definitely opportunities around planned giving. If there's one question you should be asking your development department, it's, do we have a planned giving program? There you go. I just did it. Development department. I'm sorry about that. You should ask your organization, whoever deals with development, you should be thinking about, are we doing a planned giving? Are we doing a legacy giving program? Because if you're not, you are losing a huge opportunity here to capture some of this wealth as we watch this kind of remarkable historic national transfer of wealth. And then the last thing is something that I think everybody's aware of, which is foundations and corporations have really moved away from the major art forms. And while family foundations continue to support us, the picture is not so rosy on the big national foundations and corporations. Let's talk about finances. So we have a thing which we call the Orchestra Statistical Report, which has been going for many, many decades. It has hundreds of data points about orchestras, and every year about 150 to 200 orchestras fill out their data into the report, and they send it to us, and we analyze it. And we send it back by group size. It's not publicly available. We send it back by group size to executive directors and finance directors, and it's available to board chairs and board members as well. And it makes really interesting reading because you can really compare and benchmark what's going on in your orchestra relative to other orchestras your size. So it's a very interesting report, which is probably why it's one of those like fundamental league services that has been going forever. And these are, we have this divided up by every orchestra, every group size. This is the total picture. This is all size orchestras from the biggest to the smallest. So it's incredibly generalized. But in general, we talk about often talk about financial crises in our field. But in general, orchestras are having across the whole field a positive change in net assets. Endowment draws between 4% and 5%, which I think is about realistic. Average week's expense and liquidity is it's about half a year. It's not unreasonable. Of course, in the pandemic and back in 2010, that was just absolutely nowhere. So we're in a moment where it definitely could be worse. Then there is just a couple of data points here about the roughly a third of most orchestras' performance revenue comes from subscription sales. And then I put down here this average cost of fundraising per dollar raised. In other words, 12 cents on the dollar for fundraising and about 50 cents a dollar for tickets purchased. And one of the things we can conclude from that is how fundraising is very efficient. And so when orchestras invest in development staff, they generally can see a very good net return on investment. Okay, so let's go on to, and again, I just emphasize again, this is highly averaged. So this is kind of a, I mean, again, we could spend a long time on this slide, but we don't have. So I'm going to do this pretty quickly. How is the report card on orchestras with equity, diversity, inclusion? Well, it's mixed. In some areas, in programming, we've made a remarkable change. We've still got a long way to go, but there's been remarkable change in the last 10 years. Big increases in number of women who have women composers. We've had the League's had something to do with that with our big Toolmin Women Composers program. Living composers are very strong, and composers of color are very strong. And there's been huge growth there. We've still got a way to go, but there's been huge growth. And really interesting, this last bullet. This is not regional. This change has occurred in all orchestra budget groups of all sizes, all orchestras of all sizes, and across all regions. In terms of staff, staff and board, staff members are the most diverse, probably not surprising. Executive directors are roughly 50-50 men to women, but men are definitely dominant in the larger orchestras. Board diversity is improving, but it's interesting to note that boards of orchestras are still less racially diverse than nonprofit organizations in general, and we still have a problem with women's representation. On the artist side, again, like with composers, we've seen great increases with women conductors and conductors of color. And I will just observe, being somebody who's spent my entire career watching conductors, the talent coming here is absolutely terrific. And we have a whole new generation coming through now, which is exciting to watch. So we are we're making good progress there, and it's exciting to be able to report that because it matters in terms of representation of all communities. Okay, so that's just the baseline. So a lot of exciting things, a lot of exciting progress there. So now that's a kind of quick overview of what's going on in the field. What I think I'm going to do now is just talk a little bit about what we offer you here at the League, tell you a little bit about the League, about how we fit in, what's our role, and how you can access some of the things we provide. So first of all, a little bit of history. The League's been around a while. It's founded in 1942, initially as a small network for small orchestras, but after World War II, large orchestras came into the coalition, and that resulted in big explosion in critical mass. The first League conference in 1942. We're about to have our 80th conference. The statistical report that I talked has been going on amazingly for decades. And the beginning of our professional development programs goes back to the 1950s. And then in the 1960s, we were chartered back to Congress. So we've got a long and established history in our own organization. There's 26 of us, plus some freelance contractors. We are headquarters in New York, but we became, during the pandemic, largely a virtual organization, and we have staff, as you can see here, all over the country. Well, not quite all over the country because we don't have anybody in the West actually, but in the Midwest and in the North and in the South, we are quite well represented, and that has become a source of strength for us because we have people in the states where, in the parts of the country where we have orchestras. And we're about a $6.5 million annual budget. So we equate in our own organization to being a kind of a medium-sized orchestra. This is an important slide because you will be aware that your orchestra pays dues. In the case of large orchestras, pretty substantial dues. Our 450 or so, 650 or so members are certainly, those dues are a vital part of us being able to provide, the resources we provide to the field. But the dues only cover about a third of the cost of running a business. So for us, there's about a third of running the business, about a third kind of earned revenue, and then about a third of what we do has to be fundraised. So our fundraising is vital. Many people support us generously, from big philanthropy right down to small annual gifts. We appreciate every single donation. Many of the donors are actually people like you on this call. Board members of American Orchestras is a critical constituency, and we're tremendously grateful to all of you. This is our vision and mission. Thriving future for orchestras and their communities that celebrates creativity, artistry, and inclusion. And our mission to champion the vitality of music and the orchestral experience, support the orchestra community, and lead change boldly. And I always read those last few words kind of a little bit deliberately, because I always want to remind everybody that we're a support organization. We bring people together. But we also are a leadership organization, because we hope that we can lead the field into being its best, its most successful, its thriving self in the future. And so we take that very seriously as part of our mission. We have a national board. Again, there's a big constituency, 54 people. A big constituency within our board is, again, people like you, board members of orchestras. And that representation from across the field and across the music business, from other professionals from different areas of life, is absolutely vital to us, because it's how we get to understand what's going on in the field. But we also have an ex officio constituency on our league board, which is representatives from the different budget size groups. And this is important because this is really your way in which your voice is heard on the board level about policy. The CEO groups meet regularly. If you have something you want to say to the league, you are absolutely welcome directly to say it to us, but you also have this route through your CEO to the CEO groups, through to us, through our representatives. This is my leadership team. It's a terrific group of people. I will just, one thing I will point out here, which is Kane Thomason-Reedus is not only a Vice President of Inclusion and Learning, but also a performing musician, plays with orchestras. So having a musician participate, be one of our senior team, is very important. Karen Yer is a researcher and a very established kind of thought leader in research. Heather Noonan has been working in Washington, D.C. for the League for more than 28 years, and is one of the most important people in D.C. in arts leadership. And I'm going to come on to that in 1 minute. And then Marla and Andrew are great finance and fundraising folks. It's a very strong team. This is a little document where we have, which we call League by the Numbers. You can take a look at this at your leisure. Just share with you. The website is worth looking at. It's a very, very rich resource. And I would point out that these 4 categories on the website, learn, connect, advocate, and envision, are really how we think about our work. And I'm just going to really quickly take you through what's in the website. So learning is all the convening, it's the conference, it's the seminars and webinars like this, it's our professional development programs and all the different investment programs we have. Then we also have publications. And there's so much stuff on the website. It would take you a lifetime to get through it. But if you go into the section on the website called Learn, you can look up, there's a whole section where you can go in and look up everything by topic, which is an incredibly helpful resource. Connect is all about Symphony magazine, media relations, social media, everything that we do to bring people together. And we regard bringing people together as a vital part of our work. And then advocate, and this is really, I won't say it's the most important thing we do, but through the pandemic, nothing has been more important. And today, now, as we're looking at a very complex environment in Washington, D.C., it's more important than ever. Speaking up, it's representation for the White House administration, Congress, and the entire nonprofit sector. It's all the specifics about not only hundreds of millions of dollars which came in COVID relief, which we were deeply involved in, but it's the practical stuff. It's supporting good visa rules. It's supporting free movement of travel with musical instruments. It's about tracking charitable giving trends. And it's about helping orchestras build their advocacy capacity at home. And this is worth mentioning. We don't do state advocacy. We only do federal advocacy, but we rely on the national network. We rely on orchestras, and this is a powerful map. The League represents orchestras in 313 out of 435 congressional districts. We reach 100% of the Senate and 72% of the House of Representatives. And with our members evenly represented by both parties, continued bipartisan support for issues that impact orchestras remain critical. And I want to underscore a very important point here. The League is a non-partisan organization. We believe, and not only do we believe, we have decades of experience that support for the arts is a bipartisan issue. The arts have thrived because they are supported by members on both sides of Congress and the House, and Senate and the House, and we work productively right across the political divide. So although you will see us, espousing some important causes, particularly around inclusion, we are definitely staunchly non-partisan in the way we approach our work. This is just we regularly issue advocacy updates. This is just, I'm not going to talk about this, just a few of the live issues right now, and you can see just how important it is. This is stuff that happens behind the scenes that nobody gets to see about. No member of the public gets to see this work going on, but we are constantly working and fighting for orchestras behind the scenes. And it's not, an important takeaway from this slide is, it's not just about funding. It's about a broad range of issues right across the kind of national and legal picture. And then the last part of our website is what we call Envision, imagining the future of orchestras. That is really the connection to these words, and lead change boldly. That's the part of our mission that we regard as extremely important, and we don't think we're always right, but we certainly think that it is our role to provoke discussion, and to constantly think about how orchestras can be better and more successful and thrive in the future. So amazingly enough, 3:58, Doug and David, I think we've timed it pretty well. We said we'd finish at 4, but then we would allow another 15 minutes for anybody who wants to stay on, and we're happy to.
So Simon, we have a question that's open in the Q&A that I think we ought to try and answer live.
Okay.
The question is, any comments about impact on the arts of the new administration? And I know you touched on that a little bit,
Yeah.
just a few minutes ago, but I think the answer is probably yes. We have in the past successfully rebuffed attacks on the arts through a set of bipartisan relationships. Just to say a small example, there was an attempt during the first Trump administration to zero out the National Endowment for the Arts, and Republicans in Congress said no. And so our relationship across the aisle, with both sides of the aisle, is critical. What happens beyond NEA funding with regard to anything else is anyone's guess. My guess is that there's someone who's launching a lawsuit that basically says the federal government under the First Amendment can't qualify grant and aid programs on people adopting a particular point of view on any topic, including diversity, equity, and inclusion. Who knows how that will play out? I wouldn't be surprised if there's an attempt to make that a touch point issue that would affect orchestras, but it hasn't happened yet. And for the reasons that we kind of laid out of why there's a business case for this work. We're urging orchestras to not give up on that at this point. So
Yeah.
it's a quick
I,
answer.
I would just add to that, one of the things, like if Heather Noonan were here, she has vast experience in advocacy. One of the things that I think that we want to just continue to emphasize is we're not going to respond to conjecture or supposition or fear. So we don't know what this new administration is going to bring. Just what we've seen in the last few days of new programs, new rules being introduced and then immediately pulled off is a good example of why we should not overreact here. We at the League, we're taking a fairly kind of thoughtful approach to responding to what we hear, and if and when we have particular issues that we need to tackle, we will tackle them. But it certainly is it is absolutely clear that we're in a new world. It's a new paradigm of political thought, and I don't think we know where it's going yet, but we'll continue to be thoughtful about it. I'm going to take this slide off here now.
And I just want to add, and I put in the chat, our next free member webinar is coming up in just a few weeks on Tuesday, February 25th, where Heather will talk about playing your part advocacy in 2025. So this conversation continues in about 4 weeks' time.
Great. What else do we have, David? Any other questions that we didn't pick up as we went along?
No more specific questions.
We did at the very outset, we had a question about structural deficits, and we touched on that, but I'm not sure we provided an answer that would be satisfying for the question, for the person who posed the question. I mean, and that's partially because there isn't a particular answer. We have a finance resource center on our website that includes a lot of materials that would help an orchestra fine-tune its finances. Ultimately, dealing with a structural deficit comes down to either cutting expenses or adding revenue. Although the balance sheet and the ability of the balance sheet to support the organization's income statement is a related topic and shouldn't be overlooked. There are a lot of organizations out there that are now desperately seeking revenue increases with the understanding that if those new revenues don't come, they're going to have to be much more vigorous about cutting expenses. And that's always a difficult challenge for our field. The largest expense of most orchestras is the cost to employ the musicians. And so then it becomes a real clash of interests potentially between organizations and the musicians that they employ. And so it's a subject that has to be approached very thoughtfully in collaboration with the musicians, looking at every possible tool you can employ. And it's really, I would say it's not usually successful just to say, well, our biggest expense is the orchestra, let's cut the cost of the orchestra. That almost always ends poorly. So approaching that structural deficit topic in a holistic way with the involvement of the musicians gives you a chance of success without creating huge drama in your organization.
One topic I'll just pick up really briefly here. Somebody mentioned strategic planning. I just want to let you know that I am actually running a seminar on strategic planning, like a full afternoon seminar on strategic planning at the conference in Salt Lake City this June. I think it is, not sure if it's formally announced yet, David, whether people can sign up. Is there a sign up you can put here just in case anybody is interested? If anybody is planning to come to Salt Lake City, you feel like I know the strategic planning is a constant topic of interest to people. I've done quite a bit of it, and I've talked about it before. So that's a topic that we'd love to see some of you there. Are there any other questions that anybody would like to ask?
I think you have covered everything very thoroughly. And again, feel free to follow up with us with any questions at any time. But yes, again, everyone registered for the webinar will receive the slides, the transcript, the recording, and we are also going to post these on our website, on our Noteboom Governance Center as well. So you can have access to them 24/7, probably until the next time we do this webinar, and maybe replace and update some of the resources. And the conference sessions, the big opening and closing sessions will be videoed and put on our website as in the past, and we'll make audio recordings of most of the other sessions during the conference as well. But this will be our first conference in Salt Lake City, hosted by the Utah Symphony, Utah Opera. And so we're very excited to be going to a new city again this year, and hope that many of you can join us. Again, the dates for the conference are June the 11th through the 13th.
Wonderful. So I guess that's it.
And again, please share this recording, the resources, the links with board members who could not be with you today. And we look forward to seeing you many again on February 25th for our next webinar on advocacy questions.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks for fighting for the music.
Go for it. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you all.
Bye now. Bye.
Bye-bye.